You are listening to the Billy Dees podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. Today, we have an interview for you, and it's going to be a good one. It's going to be about film, TV, the history thereof. On the studio line with me is Mike Scalere. Mike, so glad you are here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Billy.
Absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit about Mike. Mike studied cinema studies at NYU and spent 20 years working in network television at HBO and the History Channel. And now he runs his own production company. He started Scalere, and we'll talk about what that is, because he believes film is about community, and he wanted a place to have real conversations about movies, the craft, the story, the culture, and what it all means. He isn't just about reviews. This is one of those. This is a filmmaker's perspective on cinema, built around the idea that the best part of watching a great movie is talking about it with other people who care. Come for the films, stay for the conversation is his byline. It's really great. So, Mike, where do you hail from? What part of the world did you come from?
I live in New York.
New York.
Yeah,
should have known.
New York, born and bred.
Should have known. That's good. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Were you always interested in film and media? When did you catch the bug? Most people do early, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the reason I even went to film school, my parents had bought my brother and I a book. It was like a coffee table book. It was Industrial Light and Magic.
Okay.
And it showed you how they did a lot of the matte paintings and little models for Empire Strikes Back and Indiana Jones and whatnot. And I remember just poring over that book. I must have been 8, 9 years old. Just like, it was amazing to me that the movies I had seen that I thought were all real life were actually miniatures, models. And that's what really kicked it off for me. Yeah, this sort of like ruse, like don't look behind the curtain. Getting that glimpse of how they did it just made me think, it made me question everything. I was like, what's real then?
Yes.
You know, what is it?
Well, we could certainly talk about that today, because today it's even more crazy, right? With AI and everything else. I appreciate the content that you do when you talk about the history of stuff. And I'm going to say when it comes to film and TV, things really heated up after World War II for a lot of different reasons. The technology during the war got better because they were developing weapons and spy technology. A lot of it was, quite frankly, was taken from the Nazis. And so you really have, after World War II, you have a vast improvement in the quality of music recordings, a big improvement in the way films looked. All that stuff, a big improvement. What strikes you about that time period? That was like the golden age of Hollywood, like the late 40s there, because the vast majority of people, if you wanted to watch anything, you had to be in a theater, right? Right. So there's a couple of things about that period, and I'm glad you brought up the technological advances in World War II. You know, so I can only put so much in the videos I make. Sure.
But one of the first cameras I used, and this is probably going back to the mid 90s, we were still using these Ariflex 16 millimeter cameras, and they were famous for being indestructible because they were the camera used in the wings of the fighter planes.
Oh, wow.
And I remember this technology that was developed in the 40s for the fighter planes. Like every time they hit the gunner, would hit the trigger of the gun, the camera would roll, you know, and so they had to be indestructible, and they were still working by the 90s when I learned. So things like that, little facts and nuggets like that make it so fascinating to me. But I also think after the war, there really wasn't a whole lot of entertainment happening. And so you had to go to the movies. That was the only form of entertainment. And all these guys were coming home from the war. They were meeting back up with their girlfriends and wives. They were starting families. And besides radio, there really wasn't much else to do. So I love that there was this medium they can go to a couple times a week and see the biggest stars of the day, you know, just get away from all the things that they had already previously done in the war, get all those memories out of their head and start life new again. Yeah. Like I just loved it.
You were mentioning too that this time period is where most of the information that you didn't get from the paper, you know, you got from the newsreels, and a lot of us may have seen the old newsreels where Movie Zone talks about, and the entertainment, a lot of the shorts, the Three Stooges shorts, things like those were all things that were shown before the main feature, right?
Right.
And so that was kind of like the news of the time. If you wanted to see something filmed, as in live action, it had to be in the theater.
Well, I thought it was interesting too. And again, these are just bits of fact. I don't know why I hold on to these movie trivia things, but color took so long to get into the cinemas because everyone associated color with the cartoons that aired before.
Really?
And they thought color's fake. So the executives at the time in the 40s and 50s, they thought no one's going to believe a color film. They'll think it's Tom and Jerry, and the newsreels were in black and white. So they thought that's reality. So you're talking about a time when you wanted to do, serious film noir movies or dramas. To think of them in color back then, they thought that would be ludicrous,
yes.
And then of course the Wizard of Oz comes out and everyone goes, whoa, hold on a second. But that was a fantasy movie.
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to go somewhere with this later in the podcast as we go through the history of this. But at this time, I'm going to say, quote unquote, real journalism was either in the paper or it was radio. The radio guys were the real journalists at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, TV starts to rear its head. It was invented a decade or two before, but in terms of practical terms, actually getting it online. And we've gone through this so many times with different formats. When high definition was coming out in the 90s, the manufacturers said, well, we're not going to produce a lot of them because there's nothing to watch. And all the broadcasters said, well, we're not going to produce any shows because nobody has anything to watch them on. So who is going to get into bed first? Right. This happened with TVs in the late 1940s and the 1950s. Broadcast companies that, were very settled in radio didn't want to invest in the new medium because only 1 or 2% of the population had it. But people did like the idea, so it caught on. And by the 1950s, early 1950s, it was really rolling. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. I understand it the same way.
Okay. As the 50s go on, you have television shows, which were essentially live most of the time. So people were watching a live stage play. And that was different than movies, which were set up shot by shot and orchestrated. Right. And the feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that how do we compete with this? You got somebody talking about something that's happening in New York as it's happening. And the solution was to go bigger. That's where you got CinemaVision and Technicolor.
Cinerama, CinemaScope, right.
Yeah,
right.
all that stuff. You want to talk a little bit about that? And we're going to talk about this too, because the demise of cinema has been predicted many times, and this was the first thing that was going to do it in, right?
Well, I would argue that sound was the first one. Everyone sort of threw their hands up and said, oh my goodness, the talkies, cinema's dead. Now we have to, this is a new thing now. But I think you're right. The first real sort of battle that cinema had for our hearts and minds was television, because it proved you didn't have to leave the house for it.
Yeah.
Television you can get your entertainment at home. But what I think what the studios at the time did was to make bigger and better. And I think it changed cinema for the better because we got VistaVision out of that. We got CinemaScope out of that. We got stereophonic sound. We got all this amazing stuff. Like we got an event at the theater. But I do think, like you were saying, television had something up its sleeve that film never could compete with, which was live.
Yes.
And it started like what you said, like radio plays on, videos. I'm sorry. Filmed versions of radio plays, but it became the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. It became the moon landing. It became things that you would never go to a cinema for because it just structurally couldn't handle that kind of event. Yeah. So I think, while people thought TV would kill cinema grew stronger because of TV, but I think it didn't fight on the one front it knew it couldn't, which was live. Yeah. It never could. Yeah.
Live has always been a predictor. At one time it was going to end regular photography too, although I don't think it has. Yeah. I think there's still sports photographers that manage to catch something in that split second that you don't get with a constant image. There was a story. I'm from Canton, Ohio, with Pro Football Hall of Fame is right down the road. Nice. And you go through the archives out there of some of the things that have been said. And one of the things was, I forget who the player was. It was like during the late 1950s, 1960s. He had his helmet off, and there was a little steam coming off of his forehead. And there was a photographer there leaning over trying to get that picture, and he looked over his shoulder, and there was a TV camera showing it live. Right. And he realized, okay, we got to do something different now, So that's been an issue for a long time. The 1950s, still very much a grand time. The movie that comes to mind, which was 1959 or something like that. And I'm not a religious person, but I got to say this movie, content aside, impresses me in terms of the scale that it was done, and that's Ben-Hur. That's one of the ones that always stood out in my mind. It's one of the first movies I saw. Of course, this was years after it came out. It was re-released during the 1970s, and my dad took me to see it at one of the big old-fashioned theaters, and you saw the chariot race on the big screen.
Oh, yeah.
And that was something, that quite frankly really hasn't, in my opinion, even with all the modern technology, all the stunt work and all the CGI, that chariot race, which was done essentially in practical effects, real time, I think it's amazing. I think even to watch it this day, it's very impressive.
I mean, I think that's a very important movie you're bringing up because we're just after the weekend the Odyssey premieres.
Yeah.
And Christopher Nolan famously shot the Odyssey on film, on 70 millimeter IMAX film, and did like 90% of the visual effects there practically. Like there's very little CGI in the Odyssey. And I think there's something to be said about a movie like Ben-Hur, looking at it in the lens of the Odyssey coming out. Like you have to say to yourself, why is the Odyssey coming out now? Well, because we're losing market share to streamers. Theaters are having a tough time coming back from the pandemic. So there's a reason these big spectacle movies come out and remind you why it is we go to the movies.
Yeah. Now, Ben-Hur, as I recall, was shot on a version of 70 millimeter film, although it wasn't quite that. It was like 65 millimeter, but there was so much of the film that was held aside for sound. So,
right, and I thought it was CinemaScope. Is that not a CinemaScope film? I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I thought Ben-Hur was. I know it's not VistaVision.
No, I don't know for sure. I know it's some widescreen. What exactly the aspect ratio is, I don't know. But yes, and it holds up because if you transfer that to digital today and do all the upgrade, you're dealing with such a large real film that's captured that much more light and image that the Blu-ray version looks fantastic. It absolutely looks fantastic.
I think people need to know, though, that movies are compressed when you see them on streaming. That seeing even a laser digital projection, a lot of people don't have IMAX, true 70 millimeter IMAX in their hometowns. And I think it's important to go see movies like that, even if it's as long as it's in the aspect ratio that the director chose to shoot it in, because like you were saying, you don't want it cropped. Like, and I think when films came to TV after Ben-Hur, like, I don't know if you ever, I've never caught it on TV, but if it were to go on TV, they crop the edges off. They do what's called pan and scan. They just, ruin the movie, frankly, from what the director originally wanted. Yes. And then what's the other alternative? You put the letterboxing on and it becomes this long, skinny thing in your TV. So I think it's important, not so much the format that you're watching film on, but to see it in the aspect ratio that the director intended. Yeah.
Well, I was involved in electronics during the 1990s, and a lot of people didn't understand because of the fact that high definition was 16:9. It still is. Yeah. People said, "Well, I don't understand. I watched this movie, and there's still the black at the bottom and the top." And I told them, "You don't know what that ratio is. It depends on who the director is, whether it's anamorphic or whatever. Right. And some of them can look like a ribbon across there." But I will say this: I think it was worse. Like when I was young, and TVs were 4:3. When you watched a pan and scan movie, it looked horrible. And if you did the full frame in the thing, it did look like a third of the screen was being used. So it's not quite so bad with 16:9, but it's still not the full thing.
I remember in the early days when I was shooting in my network television days, we'd want it to look cinematic. So we would just crop the top. We'd shoot it 4:3. So we'd crop the top and the bottom to make it look cinematic, even though it was just regular standard def.
Yes. So a lot happened there you had movies like Shane, you had all those big, and there was actually an art and a trick that they would use when they filmed out west to make the mountains look even more larger. I forget exactly what the technique was, but they shot it in a way where, they were like zoomed in, but they moved the camera closer and made so that was something. I don't know that today people spend that much time. It seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the movies are very dark And I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And you don't get that big expanse of like the mountains in the background and things like that. I don't know that they spend time. Am I wrong with that?
No, there's a couple things. I think now we shoot in something called log or raw. And so what it does is it flattens the image out so that when you're on set, you can see into the darkness, you can see the details. And then, so it's basically looks like it's a flattened image. It looks, colors all saturated out. It really just, you're looking at it for exposure, really, essentially, and framing. But when you come back into the post-production world, you can color correct it. And what a lot of people do is, since they see detail back there, they leave detail or they make it go away completely. So I think we're living in a digital world, and I think we're still color correcting movies as if it were film. And I think you're going to start seeing in the next few years. I mean, we've been using it for about a decade now, these digital technologies. So I'm really stretching the limits of my my ability to forgive them for this. But I think if you, the reason they do it though is because when they shoot a film, they'll pitch an idea. I want it to look like a certain thing, but they also want to leave their options open. I might want to make it look like a film noir. I might want to make it look more bright and poppy. And so because digital gives you the option to choose later, they are doing exactly that. They're leaving everything there and deciding later what it should look like. But back in the Ben-Hur days, they came away from that shooting day with exactly what it was going to look like.
Yeah.
That's it. It's exposed. I mean, you could push the colors a little here or there, but that's what it looked like.
That's what it looked like. Yeah. And of course, back in those days too, they weren't thinking about, video and streaming after the original release. How is it going to look on video? Right. And so it was a little bit of a simpler time. As I mentioned, back with TV and radio, what's going on in the background there, 1960s, early 1960s, I'm going to say that, real journalists were on the radio. Yeah. Then November 22nd, 1963 happened, and that horrible weekend with Kennedy. Yeah. And the entire nation was glued to the TV. And I think at that point, a bunch of executives were sitting around that following week and said, we had everybody in the United States watching TV. Yeah. And we can do something with this news. Okay. And of course, during the 1960s, there was the civil rights movement. There was Vietnam. There was the moon landing. Mm-hmm. What happened with film during the 1960s?
Well, let me go back to your first point. I would argue that moment, Kennedy's assassination, was the beginning of the 24-hour news cycle.
Yes.
People like to say it's the first broadcast of CNN, which is literally the 24-hour news network.
Yes.
But I think that's when the seed got in everybody's head, like you said, that we're going to break into coverage to bring you some news, and we're going to show you news at all times of the day, not just at 11 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock, at the news hours. But I think what happened to TV, you can edit this, right? You can edit some of my stumbles. You're talking to a post producer here. Like I know the post process. I think what happened to cinema in the 60s, though, is it became much more adult in theme. Yeah. So it didn't. It had already battled television on scale and everything. And if you remember, in the 50s and 60s, film was going under the Hays Code, the 40s and 50s, really. Yeah. The Hays Code, which was keeping everything clean, no dirty words, you can't do certain things on screen. But television had to do the same thing. Their internal network rating agencies had to keep it really tame because you couldn't tell who was going to turn the TV on at home.
Exactly, sure.
Not like a film where you could let somebody in, or you can say, no, don't come in. This one's rated R or PG-13, but they didn't have 13 back then. But yeah. But anyway, film sort of said, hey, let's start tackling more adult themes and start doing away with the Hays Code. And I have my dates wrong because I'm not a numbers guy, but sure. The numbers I have to have in front of me. But towards the mid to late 60s, the Hays Code was gone, and I think we came with the MPAA ratings somewhere in that era. Yeah. I remember films getting X ratings, and that being a badge of honor for like Midnight Cowboy got an X rating. It was like, and it wasn't X as we think of it now, right. Pornography. It was X like this is truly adult content. It should really be for adult viewers, and film moved into that era. And I want to caution myself. I don't want to say that films got pornographic. What I mean to say is film just got more adult. Absolutely. And those themes couldn't be tackled on television at the time.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where I think there was a certain realism that they thought they could go for in the 1960s. Like you mentioned, Midnight Cowboy, which actually is a very human story.
Oh, yeah.
And the Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah, all those.
Sure.
And I think that the audience really wanted some realism. There's only so much you can do with I Love Lucy and Ozzie and Harriet. They're great shows. And I'm going to say TV had the responsibility of going over the airwaves, which belonged to the people.
Right. Where
seeing a movie was like a private transaction. You paid to go in and watch this content. So they had a little bit more freedom with what they could do. Yeah. I think that the 60s were, you started to see, I think, the birth of the anti-hero. I mean, it might have started with Clint Eastwood and The Good, Bad, and the Ugly and that whole series.
Sure.
He wasn't necessarily Alan Ladd in Shane. He wasn't that, but he wasn't bad either. He was kind of ambiguous in those movies. And you started to see the rise of that kind of character, which translated right into Dirty Harry right at the beginning of the 1970s, right?
Totally. I think it's also important, too, that TV created a generation of filmmakers that would make movies in the 60s and 70s, like, Spielberg and Lucas and Scorsese. These guys were all watching TV in the 50s and 60s, and they were watching reruns of old movies. They were watching Night of the Hunter, which was also another anti-hero movie. They're watching these movies. And so when these cinephiles, who have been brought up on a steady stream of like reruns on television, finally get to make their own movies, they're making these amazing cinematic works in like the late 60s and early 70s. So I think it's interesting to watch how one medium feeds off the other, helping one, helping the other, helping one, helping the other, back and forth. I think it's interesting.
Yeah. 70s, I'm going to say, was probably for me anyway, probably one of the best decades for movies. I mean, you had some things that set a new standard, The Godfather being one of them.
Yep. Okay.
The first really big blockbuster for a long time, summertime was considered a bad time for movies because everybody was out at the beach and everybody was, in their backyard having cookouts and stuff. Nobody's going to go to the movies during the summer. Right. And Jaws came along in 1975.
Yeah, then no one wanted to go to the beach after that.
Yeah, then you didn't want to go to the beach after that. Spectacular movie, by the way. I know that people talk about the animatronics, but actually the way Spielberg shot that, he camouflaged that shark pretty well in the first one. I think in the subsequent ones, they had everything but have that shark come out and walk on land.
But, you heard the story, right? That they built the shark for the first Jaws, and then water got into it. It didn't work.
Yes.
And so it looked bad. It was always malfunctioning. So Spielberg just shot around it. And it turned out that became even scarier, not seeing the thing. Yes. Right. And that became every horror movie from then till now is not seeing the bad guy, not seeing the killer is scarier than actually seeing the guy.
Yes. I'm going to say that's one of the when you look at that movie, there's a sequence there where Brody is throwing the chum in there, and the shark comes up, and then there's this whole sequence where the shark comes past the boat, and that whole sequence where they're rigging up the barrels and they're arguing with each other and they're trying to move the boat around. That sequence was shot with the precision of a music video. It really was. The way the music, John Williams and everything was done. It was it's absolutely magnificent. Whether you put the special effects aside, the filmmaking was fantastic. And I think
it's about Jaws. There's another scene in there that I don't think a lot of people talk about. It's when they're getting on a ferry and Brody's trying to convince the mayor to close the beaches, and he says no. But they're on this ferry and it's all one shot, I believe. I'm pretty sure it's all one shot. They get on the ferry and it keeps turning around and they keep switching sides. And I think it's brilliant because everyone's looking at the shark shots. Everyone's looking at the big ones we all remember. But Spielberg does these little tiny moves to really quickly tell you who's on one side of the argument, who's on the other.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he's a brilliant director. I don't think people give Spielberg the proper kudos. I mean, he's done crazy blockbusters, but in like Jean-Luc Godard and Scorsese, I think Spielberg is up there as far as artistic, not just pop culture.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with that. 100%.
Yeah.
He did say in an interview that he would have, if done today, he'd have done a few things differently. And one thing was not villainize sharks, because they really paid a price after that.
Sure.
Yeah. But as the 1970s rolled along, of course, Star Wars.
Well, now you're getting into my era.
Okay. And with Star Wars, I'm going to say the special effects became a star.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to? Yeah, okay. That's your. Yeah. I saw you light up. How did you greet the movie?
So I was 5 or 6 when the movie came out. And that was one of the first movies I think we saw on VHS. I don't think I saw Star Wars in the theater because I was just too young. But I did see Empire Strikes Back in the theater.
Okay.
And so that must have been 82, I think, is Empire. So I was 9 when Empire came out. And to me, these were more than movies. They were like some people reading Greek tragedies. They were like just the core of my existence was Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and then eventually Return of the Jedi. Because I do blame the VHS for this, because we got to watch it over and over and over again.
Okay.
I think that's what made me a film lover, not just the book I was telling you about, but also the fact that I had HBO in the early 80s and they'd play the same movies over and over and over again.
Yeah, they did.
You know, you sit there and watch it, and my brother and I would just repeat lines over and over again. You know, we'd say the Han Solo line where she says, I love you. And he goes, I know. We'd say that over and over and over again until it was like burned into our brain.
Yeah.
And I think, much like the directors of the 50s, like we're young, Spielberg was young, watching TV and reruns. I was watching it on VHS over and over and over again. Became a film fan that way.
Sure. You mentioned VHS, and I saw your segment on VHS and beta. Yeah. And like I said, I sold and installed high-end electronics for many, many years. And if I had a dime for every time somebody asked me, now, is this going to be another VHS or beta? I think people held on to that way too long.
Yeah. The VHS or the beta, you think?
Say again?
Did they hold on to VHS or beta too long?
That whole argument, that whole thing, they were so traumatized by the fact that one format overtook another, and then everybody was stuck with all these tapes.
Yeah.
So anytime something new came out, whether it was DVD or whatever, now this isn't going to be another VHS and beta, is it? I got to tell you this. I caught your, your explanation of it. Absolutely. Sony held on to the rights of beta, and they wanted it to be that if you bought a beta machine, it was going to have Sony on it.
Right. Okay.
Whereas JVC, I believe they still own it. They leased VHS for a very small amount of very little nothing. And that saturated the market. And pretty soon, VHS kind of took over.
Yeah.
And it was actually the inferior format technically. But I will say this, and here again, somebody who is, I was working in video stores by the mid-1980s. And I can tell you what was the final death knell for VHS was when the porn industry went VHS.
It's so funny. I'm getting comments on that video for the exact same thing. Yeah. And I purposely didn't mention that. Okay. You're right. Everyone was like, it's because of porn that VHS became so popular. I would argue it's not. I think what you said is actually more correct. Yeah. That's why people moved away from VHS when that came in.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Yeah. It was, I don't think you can understate the influence of the porn industry. I mean, we're talking high-speed internet, all that stuff.
Right.
Okay, they had an influence in all of it. But they did play a role.
Yeah.
The other thing that Sony did, we don't need to talk about it because it's an audio format, but they did the same thing with minidisc.
I remember that.
Yeah, they did the same thing. During that time, there was a very good format called Laserdisc. Back in the, do you remember those? Did you have?
I remember, and you had to flip them, I think.
Yes, they would play about an hour, and then you would have to flip them, and then of course the better models got to the point where they would play both sides.
Right.
But there was a little break where you had to wait for it to change. But those things were extraordinarily good, and they just didn't catch on for one reason or another. I think the idea that you had to flip them, and they were expensive. They were very expensive.
Their quality, I think, it rivals Blu-ray now. I think it was way better than the VHS format. It was way better than I think it was better than DVD that came out after it because it was so big. It had so much information on it.
Yeah.
But like I said, it was inconvenient. Yes. And convenience will always win. Look at MP3 and album sales.
Yeah.
MP3 was easier. It might not sound as good as vinyl, but MP3 is easier.
Yeah, you have 5,000 songs in the palm of your hand.
Right.
And that's a whole nother topic, but I can tell you as an audiophile, I think the appreciation of actually listening to music is gone now. I mean, I can remember, and here again, this same time period, people still had a real good appreciation for movies in the 1980s. And I think they still had a real good appreciation for music back in the 1980s. What they called hi-fi at the time.
Yeah.
Listening to music was a social event. You would have somebody come over, and especially in the old days, everybody was real particular about their equipment. They had the speakers measured from the wall to get all the right acoustics, and you'd listen to Pink Floyd or whatever. And now everybody has a phone. They got kazoodles of songs in the phone. All these phones basically work the same. They all sound the same.
Yeah.
And there isn't, and everybody's got their ear things on in their own little world. And I don't know that fine appreciation of every nuance of every sound is there anymore. And I'm going to say the 1980s were probably the last decade when people, in 90s a little bit, really watched the scope of the movie for the things going along, and not just with the actor, but some of the subtle images, the way the lighting formed patterns on the screen, whether it be triangles or whatever that would draw your attention into certain places. People were very in tune to the skill of filmmaking during the 1980s. Do you think they still are today? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I think they are, but I think I can speak for my own kids. I have kids who are in college. One's going into college, one just graduated college. And I think when they sort of appreciate a medium, whether it's sound or film, it's when they appreciate how it's made.
Yeah.
Like, I think for a long time, my kids looked at movies like, well, Toy Story is just going to be on the TV. Like, that nobody crafted it and made it. But once they get to a certain age, I think when people in general get to a certain age and they mature, they can see, hey, somebody made this album. I want to listen to this album, this song that somebody recorded and mixed. I want to watch this film that somebody made. And a lot of times, what I love about criticizing movies is, and it changes my opinion on movies sometimes, is when I look at something that I'm like, whoa, why is that shot where it is? And then I have to stop before I say I don't like it or I like it. I have to go, why did the director put that shot there? Let me start intellectualizing why that choice was made. And it's changed movies around for me sometimes when I think about what I would do in that situation. And it's the same thing with appreciation for film and music, I think. And I think once people start realizing there are actual people making these things, it will absolutely generate a lot of excitement for it, which is why I think AI is such a problem, because people are not making it. And that's one of my big things against AI is it loses the humanity. It loses the, oh, hey, somebody like bought lunch for the crew that day. Somebody somebody talked to these actors. They're putting in performances. They're filming it. They edited it after. Now it's just boop, 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 make it. And I think the humanity's gone.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I'm going to circle back to that because I think the AI thing is a big thing. During the 1990s, you did have some landmark movies, and I don't know that we have those anymore. Titanic, Saving Private Ryan, just off the top of my head, Forrest Gump.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Pulp Fiction.
What's that?
Pulp Fiction came out the same year as Forrest Gump. I mean, that was a crazy... I heard Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, and Shawshank Redemption were in the theaters at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Think about that for a minute.
Yeah. I heard Shawshank wasn't received as well in the theaters. It got its popularity afterwards.
Correct. Okay. So again, my research and the video I put together was saying that because Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction were out at the same time, Shawshank really didn't get the box office. So they doubled down. The studio doubled down on how many VHSs were in the market, and they flooded it because it won Best Picture that year, and it cleaned up at all the acting awards. And so people were like, hey, I didn't get to see this film. And so they all flocked to VHS to go see it on the rental market. And that's what put Shawshank in the pantheon of like great films of all time. And we have to remember that like you said, movies come out like on a weekend when people are at the beach, or people have lives. Yeah. They can't always get to the theater. So watching it on VHS, it was the only other way to see a movie then. Yes.
During the 1990s, there was another threat to movies, and that was home theater. And and with the 1990s is when digital really took off. I can remember somebody who's I'll speak for myself here. Somebody who's my age. I think I have an advantage in that I was brought up understanding electronics. When I was doing sound, I understand resistance and all this other kind of stuff. And when digital started coming in, I was able to be on the ground floor of that and incorporated it into how it was being brought into audio. And I've typically found that people that are older than me don't want to mess with the computer stuff. They say no. Right. And people that are real young coming in, they have a tendency to rely on software to fix things that they shouldn't be fixing. That's not, you shouldn't be relying on software to fix something. Okay. Yeah. Well, we can fix it in post. It shouldn't be that way. You should learn your craft. You should learn what lenses you have to use, what filters you have to use, and so on. And same with microphones, microphone placement, all that stuff. And during the 1990s, this incorporation of digital started to come in. You had Dolby Digital. You had THX. Yep. You had all these things, and everybody was competing to have these home theaters. And I remember I worked for a company that sold them, and we were approached by a company that sold advertisements that flashed on the screen while you were waiting for the movie to start. But they found out that we did a home theater. They said the theaters won't allow it. But I think here again, I don't think it did that. I mean, it didn't stop any of the movies that we mentioned from becoming landmark films. No, but
I would say the reason home video entertainment became really big in the 90s is because of DVDs. Okay. That was the first time you had surround sound baked into a film. I don't think you can't put, so it's a stereo soundtrack on VHS, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And there was there was the first one surround.
Yeah. There was a Pro Logic matrix that would take it and take the signals in common, put it in the center channel, and it kind of flipped and went in the back and kind of gave you a spatial effect, but it really wasn't multi-channel sound.
It wasn't mixed for it. Like it wasn't, the studio didn't mix the movie with sound effects behind you until DVDs came out. And then I remember getting even a DVD of a Sting concert that was specifically in 5-channel surround sound, thinking, oh, this is going to be amazing. And it was really, really good. And I had such high hopes for like concert videos coming out on DVD. And it just never really went anywhere. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple good ones that people in your comments will be writing, oh, you should have saw this one. But it really isn't a thing that went anywhere. Surround sound for concerts?
Yeah. Yeah, it didn't. And there's a lot of arguments about that. A lot of the sound guys who I run with will tell you that, music is still best in 2-channel. And then there's other guys will tell you, well, when you're in a concert hall, it's going all around. And blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but I don't know that you can do that in the living room. That's a conversation for another time. And there's no right or wrong answer. Who knows? As the 2000s wore on, a lot happened with digital. The streaming really broke in.
Yeah.
And Hollywood did not embrace it, just like they did not embrace VHS.
Right.
And I'll tell you, by the time DVDs and Blu-rays were coming around, I think Hollywood was starting to realize, okay, well, even if a movie's only a moderate hit in the theaters 6 months later, we can recoup some of that on video sales. Right. So they started embracing it a little bit more. But nonetheless, is when the streaming started. And I know there's the old story about how Blockbuster had a chance to buy Netflix.
Right.
I don't put much into that. I don't know what your opinion is about this, but the fact of the matter is, if Blockbuster had bought Netflix would not have been Netflix. They 100%. Just would have absorbed it, and that would have been it.
100%. They would have torpedoed it. So it's actually, I'll give you a sneak peek of my next video that's coming out probably this week. I talk about streaming in the COVID era because they came at the same time, right? So Netflix became a streaming service right as COVID was happening. And again, there's history there, like how Netflix went from people forget that Netflix was like a Blockbuster alternative. They would mail DVDs to the house. Yeah. Netflix wasn't always a streaming service. That was an add-on. If you had the DVDs coming to your house, you could then queue and access their website to watch streaming. That was like really the origins of streaming service. But what I think the big changes that happened was the pandemic, because we couldn't go to movie theaters anymore. And it's like, it really gave us a test case for cinema. Can cinema survive this? Yeah. Can streaming alone hold the weight of all the movies that are coming out and provide the entertainment that we need? And I would argue it could not, because when movies came back, we all flocked to Barbenheimer was the big example I give, that after the pandemic, everybody was like, oh, we need an event weekend. We need a Barbie Oppenheimer combo where people got dressed up like Barbie and Oppenheimer and went to the theaters and like got out of their houses for a little while. So it provided something that streaming just couldn't do, which was that event.
Yes. And I would say that, I don't know if you're a Tom Cruise fan, but I got to say Maverick was certainly part of that. He brought some people in. And
absolutely. There's another one. Yeah.
And there was it occurred to me that there was probably a generation of people that watched Maverick that never saw live action jets before. Or it's always miniatures, or it's, some space thing where it's CGI. Yeah. And I think that was part of the appeal. I think what Tom Cruise did was he realized that, one of the appeals of the wing walkers back in the 1920s with the silent film was, that was something you could take an audience to that they could not experience on a stage. And with all the CGI and all the, things being done in a room on a green screen, you're actually you're back on a stage. You're just filming it. What Tom Cruise did is, I'm outside this plane and I'm hanging out here.
Yeah. Really doing it, really out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I got to give him props for that.
I would push back and say people have wanted that kind of stunt, that kind of realism since Buster Keaton was doing similar stunts in the 20s. If you saw that famous one of Buster Keaton when the house falls on him, that's not CGI. That's literally doing the math to make sure the house doesn't hit him. But it was important to Buster Keaton that everyone at home knew this wasn't some fakery. This was real. And I think Tom Cruise is doing the exact same thing, 100 years later, saying you need to know that it's not a stuntman on that wing, that it's me on that wing doing that thing. And I think that was for Mission Impossible, though. That particular stunt was for Mission Impossible. But that was important to Tom Cruise. This is not fakery. This is real. Yeah.
I mean, across the board, he seems to be lately, that's been his new life. He's been doing these stunts, although I want to talk about his new one here in just a minute. You mentioned the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of things, I got some friends out in California. A lot of them tell me that there's some inaction going on there that's very similar to what it was like during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think California is its own worst enemy, not to get political, but here again, my friends tell me it's cheaper to go to Ireland and shoot a movie in Ireland and pay local extras than it is to do it in California.
I have an example of that for you because The Brutalist, which won Best Picture last year, was supposed to be in Pennsylvania. The story takes place in Pennsylvania, but they took the entire team to Budapest to shoot what would look like Pennsylvania. Yeah. So as soon as I read that, I thought, are you telling me it's cheaper to shoot in Budapest than it is to get a crew in Pennsylvania? And clearly it was. Yeah. So something's got to change in the business. And I'm not here to take one side or the other, but it is cheaper I've done shoots for the History Channel overseas. And I've always told people, well, we go to like Prague and Budapest because it looks like when the history took place, like it's not changed. It still looks like it's 300 years old. But the reality is it's cheaper to shoot there.
Yeah. The other thing during that time period, obviously the pandemic itself, you had the very, the insane amount of cost in California, and the emergence of TikTok and formats like it. We're dealing with a generation now that's far more likely to know who Logan Paul is or Charlie D'Amelio than they are to know who Denzel Washington is or Brad Pitt. Yeah. That's just the reality. Yeah. And I think, and here again, I'm not getting political, but there's no doubt that actors and these award shows got very political, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. You have like Jon Voight, you have Robert De Niro, both from different sides of the aisle. And I think they're both tarnishing their legacy. They're being known for something now that has nothing to do with their body of work. That's a whole nother discussion, but it was really a perfect storm from like 2020 to about 2022, 23. It was a real dip, and they're still coming out of it. What's the state of Hollywood right now?
So I think Hollywood is having it never really recovered from the pandemic. I like you. I do this. I talk about movies so I don't get political. But let's just say when the economy is doing poorly, nobody wants to spend money on entertainment.
Yes.
They're too busy worried about gas prices going up or the price of food. So I think there are bigger things to worry about than, is the new Spider-Man movie coming out? So I think that's why movies haven't really come back. There was a couple moments where we thought this is going to be great, and I think it's just been sort of steadily declining. Streaming hasn't helped that, with people being able to watch all the movies streaming. But I do think last year was a big boost for the film industry, with movies like Sinners and One Battle After Another coming out, and Weapons. And I thought last year was a banner year for movies. I think this year so far has been a surprise year. I wasn't very excited about this year in movies, but we had Project Hail Mary, which I thought was fantastic.
Okay.
We had The Odyssey, which just came out, doing gangbusters. But also, the reason I say this year was a surprise is because we had Obsession and Backrooms. Both came from people who were YouTubers, who were social media content creators, and then created movies. And I think Obsession is one of the best psychological horror films I've seen in a long time.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think it's his second film, Curry Barker's second film. I think he made one other feature film. But if you look him up on YouTube, he has all these silly videos. They're funny. They're comedies.
Yeah.
And he decided not to do silly YouTube comedies. He decided to do a serious work for his big motion picture debut. And I take my hats off to him. Great. Mm-hmm. Awesome. The same thing with Backrooms. He was doing these liminal spaces videos where not much was happening, and they put a whole story around it, and it took the box office by surprise, mostly because their audiences are living online.
Yeah.
They brought everyone who watches them on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok. They came out to the theaters to support their people, their stars. Those are their stars,
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to see what this group, like I said before, if the filmmakers from the 50s created the movies in the 60s and 70s, and the filmmakers who grew up with me in the 80s and 90s made the movies in the 90s and 2000s, I'm looking forward to the group of kids that grew up watching YouTube to see what they do in the cinema. And they may change it, but I love the fact that they're looking at an established medium and saying, I'm working towards that. Not saying, hey, I'm going to put my silly videos in a theater and people will come and pay $30 to see a 6-minute YouTube short. They are saying, hey, time to grow up, time to make a real movie. And I really love that.
That's a fantastic perspective. Getting back to, we're kind of in the technology thing again. You mentioned The Odyssey. That was shot in IMAX. Yeah. You want to talk just a little bit about what that is? I know that's an old format. It's been around a long time. And you hear the word, but I don't know that people really know what it is.
Yeah, so IMAX was, I'm not a historian completely on it. I'm a film lover, and I know that I used to watch IMAX when it was in museums, and they do things like space launches. They put an IMAX camera on a space launch or on a plane flying over this beautiful valley. And it's a 70 millimeter celluloid frame. So we're used to seeing 35 millimeter, the industry standard for years and years and years has been 35 millimeters. So it's twice as big as that. And because of that, the camera is twice as big. And that's part of the problem is, yes, it has more detail in the image. It has more contrast and color space and all this great stuff. But to work with it is really unwieldy. And you may have seen some of the videos of Matt Damon talking about how when they do over the shoulder shots, the camera's usually right here by their head. But this time he had to be a good distance away. So the eye line doesn't work with the other actor.
I see.
So I read somewhere that Christopher Nolan created a mirror situation so that it looked like Matt Damon was standing right next to the camera when the actor he was acting against, so they could get the eye lines right. But those are the considerations you have to make with a format that big. So the question has to be asked, should every film be shot in IMAX? And I would say no.
No, probably not.
I don't think you want to see the new Jackass movie in 70 millimeter. It would look great. It would look amazing. Of course it would. But I don't think everything needs that spectacle. I think I'm a fan of I don't think movies have to be high art. If you look at my Letterboxd, and I'm not doing this just to pitch my Letterboxd, but you'll see my top 4. And in my top 4, I've got Project Hail Mary, Children of Men. I love these movies, but I also have Mr. Mom, which is a Michael Keaton movie from the early 80s. And I love that movie. It doesn't have to be high art. It's just funny. It works on every level, written by John Hughes, but a fantastic film. And I don't think all film has to be high art. So I think 70 millimeter is great for the next big spectacle movie. But I think we're going to go back to shooting digital on Alexa. And I hope to see that technology get better and better as we, keep moving forward.
You had mentioned Quentin Tarantino, and one of the things I heard him say was he does not like digital and the digital projections. He said, you got a bunch of people sitting in the theater watching TV. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Because I will say this. I always tell people that the fundamental difference between TV and film is on TV, you're looking into the source of light.
Yes.
On film, you're looking at a reflected image. So it's easier on the eyes.
Okay.
And to get like, we keep talking about these, like, got to be crisper. It's got to be clearer. It's got to look brighter. But like film inherently has a dullness to it because it's a reflected light. TV, we can get as HD and Blu-ray and everything that we want, but we're looking into the light source. So of course it's going to be crisp.
Yeah.
So I think there is an inherent difference. And I'm sort of not one of these guys that thinks everything has to be the most everything, you know?
Sure.
I still think story is most important. And there's some memes going around about like what, you know, they were joking with how everyone thought how Christopher Nolan wanted you to see the Odyssey, and everyone was coming around showing the Odyssey on their Apple Watch and on like a fax machine. And I know it's a joke. I agree with that because the story is so good. If the story is so good, you can watch it on an iPhone, then it's so good that you can watch it anywhere.
Yes, I totally agree.
But did you ever hear that story about Quentin Tarantino? I will tell you one more story.
Sure, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Story. Quentin Tarantino was on a plane when Kill Bill came out.
Okay.
And he's in one aisle, and there's a guy across the aisle from him watching Kill Bill on an iPad. And it was burning him up. This guy's watching his big movie on an iPad. And so he goes over to the guy. They're flying into LA. He says, listen, I will personally bring you to my theater that I own to show you that movie if you stop watching that right now, because it's killing me that you're watching it on an iPad. And sure enough, the guy was like, oh yeah, of course. And so he brought the guy into his theater. They sat down, private screening of Kill Bill just for this one guy, because it killed him so much to watch Kill Bill on a plane on an iPad.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, he's going to love movies, that's for sure. Let me round this out with, here again, coming back to the technology, competing with whatever's going on today, whether it be the streaming and the social media and everything else. Tom Cruise. I think he's making, the movie is called Digger, and it's basically about a billionaire who is doing something, I don't know what. The previews didn't really lend it, but he's up to something that is going to cause the end of the world. Okay. And he's got to correct the problem to save the world. Okay.
Yes.
He is in made up to look old. He's made to look heavy. And it kind of, a lot of people are talking about Dr. Strangelove, but you know what? It kind of reminds me of like the Raising Arizona guys. It kind of reminds me of that too.
Ethan Coen, the Coen brothers. Totally.
Yeah, the Coen brothers. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I think he's maybe saying, okay, maybe I've dangled from cliffs, enough. I can come back to that, but people have seen that before. Let me do something different. And this movie, I don't know what the name of the film is, but rather than shooting horizontal, and for the audience, if you've ever looked at like the emoji of a camera, you'll see a round film can above and below the lens. This system shoots horizontally. So the frames are going by horizontally, to shoot the film. Now this evidently gives it more detail or some color richness or something else.
Yes, that's VistaVision, what you're talking about.
Okay.
VistaVision. I didn't realize it was shot on VistaVision, but I hope it is, because what it does is if you have 35 millimeter film this way, when you turn it on its side, you basically have one image in two 35 millimeter squares.
Okay.
So instead of 4 perforations of film, you're using 8 perforations of film. So you're essentially getting a 70 millimeter image on a 35 millimeter film stock, which I think is fascinating for all the camera geeks out there.
Yeah.
Now that VistaVision figured out a way to double the size of their image by running it horizontally. But
that's fascinating.
And they, by the way, VistaVision was interesting. Hitchcock shot a lot with VistaVision in the 50s and 60s. And then when the industry moved over to the Panasonic 35 millimeter cameras, that became the industry standard. VistaVision stayed with Industrial Light and Magic, so they can shoot all the matte shots and plate shots for Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all those. Industrial Light and Magic used it for years because it was such a big frame and gave so much resolution on the frame. Just because it wasn't being used theatrically, Industrial Light and Magic said, hey, we'll still use this. This is a great format. Yeah. So it's been in the ether for a while. And then, of course, One Battle After Another brought it back last year and shot on VistaVision, and now everyone's talking about it again.
Okay. Yes, Tom Cruise was talking about it, and he was showing the camera. And of course, they've made technological improvements on the camera over the years. So it's not the same camera that was around back in the day with VistaVision, but that's all great information. What's your impression of what he's doing with this movie, with the way it's been shot, and with what he's done with his image?
I'm glad you're asking that, because I wanted to make a video, but I didn't want to sound like I was ragging on Tom Cruise.
Okay.
I think Tom Cruise has always gravitated to movies like this. Like, he's always taking chances. And then there was a certain point in his career where, you may remember, like, he became famous for sort of going a little off the deep end. They said he was jumping on the table at the Oprah show, and he was doing some of those things. And right about there, I think people who behind the scenes, his agent, would say, hey, calm it down. Let's just do action films. And he did all the Mission Impossible films. He did the Top Gun films. And I think, though, in the back of Tom Cruise's head, this is the actual actor he is.
Okay.
Because if you remember, he did the in Tropic Thunder.
Yes.
He did that crazy cameo at the end.
Yeah.
And he did a Kubrick film. He did Eyes Wide Shut, which is not your typical Tom Cruise film.
Yeah.
And so I think there are films. I think Tom Cruise as an artist got to a certain point and people said, hey, whoa, let's make him a movie star. But now I think he's going back to his roots, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see it. This is Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, and I had to look it up because I knew I was going to get that name wrong. But he's the director who did Amores Perros. He's I think he's Mexican, Mexican director. And it is... Amores Perros is one of my favorite films, and he did Babel, he did Birdman. He's just such a great filmmaker. So in the Tom Cruise doing what he does best, like playing these really out there characters in the hands of a fantastic director. I can't wait.
Oh yeah,
cannot wait.
I'm actually looking forward to that one.
Yeah.
So hey, I'll tell you what, man, this has been a great conversation. I kept you just a little bit longer than I said I would, but hey, it's a great conversation. We are talking to Mike Scalere, and he on his social media and so forth, he uses Scalarius, which is kind of like his name along with hilarious. Now that's your YouTube channel, right? Tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah. So you can find me at YouTube and TikTok at Scalarius. And then on Instagram is Scalarius_movie guy, because my personal Instagram is Scalarius. But I really posted those three. I posted YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. And I find the community aspect of those three platforms fantastic. And like I said, or you said earlier in the thing, I always say film is about community. I'm doing this because I'm not the last word on these films. I want to talk to people about the things that I'm talking about. So I put a video up about VHS the other day, and I have all these people writing back, I remember the first VHS I got. I remember this.
Yeah.
And this is why I think we do this in the social media space, right? To start conversations and to connect with people. So like I say, I always say film is about community. This is why. This is exactly why.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Your enthusiasm for film and storytelling really comes through. Of course, you're a professional in the field. So, yes, absolutely. Maybe I'll tell you what. Well, first of all, you're going to have to come on again. And maybe when we can both go, we'll both check out Digger with Tom Cruise, and then we can go back and talk about it and other things too.
It's a day. I look forward to it. Yeah.
All right. Mike, great talking to you. My name is Billy Dees, and I'll tell the audience right now, you can find the Billy Dees podcast anywhere podcasts are found. We've been on the audio platforms, all the major ones. We've been on them for, it's over 10 years now. So we certainly have a history. Shouldn't be hard to find on your favorite platform, the Billy Dees podcast. As far as social media goes, I'm going to say X is still which is the former Twitter. I think the real-time nature of X and the trending topics of what happens there fits in with so much of our content as a podcast. When we talk about news events and things like that, it's just a great combination. But we're on all the most of the major social media platforms. I have things going on, but X is kind of like my social media home. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.